Peter Dutton is being slammed for calling for the government to stop granting visas to Palestinians fleeing Gaza, claiming it's a national security risk. The opposition leader joins us now live. Pete, good morning to you. Good to see you. Are you a heartless racist? Do you have any humanity?
I just think all the usual political tripe, put it to one side. We have to make decisions, and they can be tough decisions, but the decisions that are in our country's best interests. And we have one of the most generous humanitarian programs in the world, but people go through checks and verifications before they come here. If we have a well-managed migration program, it can work in our country's best interests, and that's been our experience largely in the past. But what's happened here, Carl, is that the government has brought people in from a war zone. In some cases, they haven't even done face-to-face interviews, and that is without precedent. 1,300 people have come here on tourist visas, again without precedent, and this all happened under Andrew Giles, who of course has now been sacked as the immigration minister because he was the guy who released 152 hardened criminals from immigration detention when it turned out he didn't need to do so. And I think it's a massive, but latest mess of the Albanese government,
Okay.
and it puts our country at risk.
So you discussed it with Shadow Cabinet, and everyone in the room agreed it's not a captain's call.
Well, Carly, it's not an issue that goes to Shadow Cabinet. I know that sort of insider talk's been going on, but I've got a great national security team with James Patterson and with Andrew Hastie. We've had countless conversations about this topic. I think the most important element here is what has the government done? They've changed the policy, so they've said that they will bring people into Australia who are sympathisers with a listed terrorist organisation. Could you imagine if we were proposing to bring people in who were sympathetic to another listed terrorist organisation like Al-Qaeda or ISIL or ISIS? It's completely unacceptable, and the government's trying to patch this up, but they are putting our country at risk.
Okay.
We can take people in a measured, responsible way.
Yeah.
That's not what they've done.
Okay, it's just about the process. So did you discuss it in Shadow Cabinet because Matt Canavan said you did, or was it a captain's call?
Again, Carl, I'm not talking about internal discussions. It's a discussion not for Shadow Cabinet, to be honest. It's a discussion with the National Security Team, and I've done that.
All
and
right.
It's in our country's best interest. There's no question. And not only that, I've been saying this since October, so I don't think it comes as any surprise to anyone. The government yesterday, the Prime Minister actually misled Parliament yesterday when he said that the same process applies in relation to bringing these people out of Gaza as applied when we took people from Syria. That is just not true. 12 months after we took that decision, I was still being criticised for not bringing people here quickly enough. We didn't process people in Syria. We took them to northern Iraq. We did face-to-face interviews. We took biometrics tests, and we checked that with our American partners. The government has done none of that, and I'm sure the vast majority of these people are just innocent people fleeing a war zone, but our country's best interest is served when we know who is coming here and when we have a proper process to exclude those who are sympathisers of a listed terrorist organisation.
So Mike Burgess issued a warning to tone the rhetoric down. You waited a grand total of 3 days before you drove a wedge through some of the community.
Well, but Carl, again, it's just not the case. My job is to act in our country's best interests. I did it as Home Affairs Minister and as Immigration Minister. We ran the second biggest humanitarian intake in the world, but we did it in a responsible way. You can't bring people out of a war zone onto tourist visas, no less, which is without precedent.
Okay.
But again, this is a decision of Andrew Giles. He's now been sacked, rightly, but the government's trying to clean up this mess.
So I get the need to protect Australians, and the process has faced many questions, important ones, but these are the same systems you trusted when you were in government, despite what you're saying. Suddenly
They're
you
not,
don't.
Carl.
So suddenly you don't.
They're just not.
The reality is suddenly you don't trust ASIO anymore.
No, Carl, it's quite the opposite. ASIO's fantastic. I appointed Mike Burgess, but Mike can only act according to the policy of the government of the day. It was not our policy in government to bring people in who were sympathisers of a listed terrorist organisation.
But isn't ASIO the
It is
gatekeeper
the Albanese
in this
government's
process?
policy
I'm
to bring people in.
Isn't ASIO the gatekeeper?
ASIO acts according to the government policy, and the government policy has changed. They haven't even done face-to-face interviews with some of these people, which again is without precedent. And that is a political decision. We never did that when we were in government. We brought people in with face-to-face interviews. As I said, we took people out of Syria, staged them in Iraq, did the interviews, rejected people who we thought were a concern.
But by saying this,
and we didn't bring them.
Peter, by saying this, aren't you eroding ASIO's credibility in being the gatekeeper to people coming into this country?
No, ASIO shouldn't be the scapegoat for a bad government and a bad Prime Minister. The Prime Minister yesterday, in what he said to Parliament, he either knowingly misled Parliament or he just didn't have a clue what he was talking about. And what we've seen with this government is that they've released criminals unnecessarily from immigration detention. They've got boats arriving up in the north that they know nothing about, and they're now bringing people here they don't know what to do with, because they abolished the temporary protection visa, which is actually the visa that they could have brought people on if the proper checks had been done. So I think the Prime Minister's all over the place here, and that's why we're in trouble.
Is it all refugees you want to stop, or just the everyday Gazan variety?
We should stop people coming in from a war zone, Carl. So that's what we should do, because we don't know if the proper checks haven't been done, the 1% or whatever it might be who pose a threat. You bring 3,000 people in, let's say 99% are good. If 1%, 30 people are questionable or sympathises with a listed terrorist organisation, how on earth is that in our country's best interests? And when we checked the people coming out of Syria, we did it with America because they had the biggest intelligence holdings in Iraq and Afghanistan. Yeah. The Americans don't have the security holdings and the intelligence holdings out of the Middle East like they did. The Israelis do, ironically enough, but none of those checks have been done. And we can bring people here, we can be generous, but it needs to be done in the right way, and it just hasn't been done.
One final question. You obviously don't really care about the Muslim vote. They're not going to vote for you anyway, let's be realistic about it. But the perception of a leader who doesn't have humanity can have wider ramifications for you.
Well, Carl, it's just ridiculous. My interest here is in making sure that our national interest is served, and that is for every Australian, regardless of somebody's political or religious belief. I don't believe it's in our country's best interests to bring people in who haven't been face-to-face interviews haven't even been conducted. We can't verify identification in some cases. They've been brought in on a tourist visa, which again is unprecedented. And my job is to protect all Australians, and that's exactly what I'm doing. So I'm not discriminating on any basis. I'm happy to see people brought in from the Middle East if they've been properly checked, or from Americas or from Asia or wherever it might be. So that sort of line, frankly, is beneath you or any other commentator. We take decisions that are in our country's best interest. That is not what Anthony Albanese has done, and that's why I think he's properly condemned in the latest botched public policy effort of the Albanese government.
All right, good to talk to you as always.
Well, opposition leader Peter Dutton is this morning under fire after calling on the government to prohibit Palestinian refugees from entering Australia, claiming it's a risk to national security. Joining us to discuss today's headlines is Nationals Senator Matt Canavan from Canberra and 9 News reporter Australia W's Heidi Murphy from Melbourne. Good to see you both. Matt, did Peter Dutton take this to the Coalition party room before making these comments?
Well, this has been discussed in our party room. Yes, it was. I don't really like to reveal that, but you might have seen my colleague Gillian Lisa has raised this issue and got full support from everybody. And look, I mean, it's hard to understand how we've ended up in a situation where the government's policy is that if people express rhetorical support for a terrorist organisation, Hamas, they're still welcome to come to this country. That's their policy.
It's not,
and
that's
I find it
astounding.
there was no opposition among my colleagues, and I don't think there'll almost be any opposition among Australians, that if you're expressing support for a terrorist organisation, you're not really welcome in this country. We should not be taking those people. Why should we?
You know that's a massive generalisation.
That's what the ASIO chief said on the weekend. Well, it's his exact words.
So you don't trust then the ASIO, the AFP, the vetting process that's underway?
Well, I don't believe in that policy. I mean, it's not a matter of trust. It's just I don't think we should be taking in people that express support for a terrorist organisation. But it is a matter of trust, because ASIO is they're tasked with vetting these applicants. They've made 7,000. There have been 7,000 rejected. If you're worried about whether or not ASIO is up to the job, then as Australians we have a lot more to worry about than that. Well, I don't think ASIO is infallible. I mean, they can't. How can they do these assessments in a situation where there is a war zone right now? How are they getting to the bottom of all these things? And it's not a matter of saying I don't think that the ASIO officials are diligent or doing their best. It's just that their best won't even be good enough in these situations. And we have to protect the security of Australians first.
It sounds as though the coalition doesn't trust ASIO.
What
do you think, Heidi?
I did not
say that. It's basically
that.
what you said.
Look, I think a blanket ban sounds a little cruel in these circumstances. I'm as concerned as anyone else about the tensions from overseas being played out on our streets. We've already seen some very concerning behaviour, but a blanket ban feels cruel.
Matt, how is this different to when the coalition under Abbott's prime ministership granted visas to Syrians and Iraqis fleeing a war zone?
Well, in those cases, there wasn't a listed terrorist organisation where those officials were supporting. It's as simple as that. I mean, in Gaza, from what we understand, something like 3 out of every 4 Palestinians support Hamas. Now, the circumstances there that have led that outcome are tragic and are horrific. And I don't know what I'd do if I was in that same situation. But as I say, as I keep coming back to, the job of the Australian government is to protect Australians first, to put this country first. And it is just not in our national interest to be taking in people where we know there'll be a large number of them sympathetic to, possibly actively supporting a terrorist organisation. It increases risk to the safety of Australians that is just unnecessary. Sorry?
Are you saying take in none?
Yeah, I don't think this is not a situation where I think we can protect the safety of Australians while taking in refugees from this area right now. Keep in mind, none of the neighbours to Gaza, like Egypt or Jordan or Syria, they're not taking refugees.
They're not taking the same case for Syrian and Iraqi refugees, Matt, as you well know. I mean, you can't say that the coalition government at the time that was in power did a good job then and trusted ASIO, and now we don't. What's changed?
Well, I just went through the differences, the very different circumstances.
But there's still a vetting process that happens. That's the point.
But it's not. I come back to the point that the vetting process is not perfect, right?
So it wasn't perfect.
I'm not going to say that the vetting process under our government was perfect. It's never going to be perfect. It's a matter of balancing the risk.
And
the risk here is just too great for any vetting process, regardless of how good it is.